Hey guys, tonight, as the day winds down and the world outside softens, we're going to ease into a journey back in time, to an era often painted with broad, colorful strokes of romance and adventure. We'll be visiting the medieval world, but not the battlefield, nor the castle intrigue. Instead, we'll pull up a quiet, unassuming chair at the table itself and consider something far more fundamental, yet surprisingly misunderstood food. What was it truly like to eat, to drink, to feast in an age without refrigerators, supermarkets, or even forks? Forget the roaring banquets filled with whole roast boars and overflowing goblets for just a moment. Tonight, we'll peel back the layers of myth and truly savor the quiet, detailed reality of medieval dining. So dim the lights. Maybe find that perfect, soft pillow and let's gently drift into tonight's culinary history lesson together. Our gentle exploration will unfold across several chapters, each designed to illuminate a different facet of this fascinating historical palette. We will begin, quite literally, at the very foundation of medieval sustenance, by considering the omnipresent and profoundly significant role of bread. This humble loaf, in its myriad forms, served as the silent, constant companion to every medieval life, from the poorest peasant to the most powerful king, defining the very rhythm of their days. Let us begin our gentle exploration by focusing on the very cornerstone of medieval sustenance, a foodstuff so fundamental it shaped the daily rhythm of life for nearly everyone: bread. For the vast majority of people living between, say, the 5th and 15th centuries, bread was not merely a component of a meal, it was, in many ways, the meal itself, the singular, most reliable source of calories and the quiet anchor of daily existence. Imagine, if you will, the comforting weight of a dense, dark loaf in your hand, its crust firm, its interior substantial, a physical promise of energy for the demanding day ahead. This was the reality for the common folk, whose bread was typically crafted from hardy, resilient grains such as rye or barley. These grains, less demanding in their cultivation than wheat, thrived in the varied climates of medieval Europe, from the chill, damp fields of the north to the more arid regions further south. Picture a medieval peasant's morning, long before the sun would cast its full light across the dew-kissed fields the small, often smoke-filled dwelling would stir. There was no concept of a varied breakfast as we know it today. Instead, the morning meal would be almost ritualistically simple, an immediate provision of necessary fuel. A chunk of yesterday's bread, likely quite hard after a night exposed to the cool air, might be softened by dipping it into a bowl of lukewarm, thin ale, a common and relatively safe beverage, or perhaps into a plain, watery gruel made from boiled oats or whatever grains were most available. This wasn't a leisurely affair with stimulating beverages. It was a quiet, almost automatic act of consumption, quickly undertaken before the arduous work of tilling the soil, tending livestock, or performing household chores began. The simple, earthy taste of the dark bread, perhaps slightly tangy from a natural sourdough fermentation, would be the most prominent flavor of their early hours. The type of bread available to them speaks volumes about their place in the social hierarchy. For the common folk, we're not talking about the airy, crisp baguettes or soft white slices we see on our tables today. Their bread was often dark, dense, and remarkably coarse in texture. Imagine a loaf made predominantly from rye, a resilient grain that thrived even in less fertile soils and colder climates. This rye bread would possess a distinct earthy flavor, perhaps with a slight tang from the fermentation process, a result of the natural yeasts and longer fermentation times common in home baking. Sometimes, it would be mixed with other grains, like barley, a versatile cereal known for its nutritional value. Though it produced a less pliable dough, barley bread, while filling, could be particularly heavy and was often reserved for the poorest laborers or as feed for animals in more desperate times. Its flavor profile leaned towards a somewhat nutty, yet robust, earthiness. In times of scarcity, or in regions where other crops struggled, even more unexpected ingredients found their way into the communal loaf, a testament to the ingenuity born of necessity. Ground peas or beans, for instance, could be added to extend the flour, providing additional protein and calories, albeit impacting the texture and flavor of the bread quite significantly, often lending it a slightly gritty feel and a more pronounced, sometimes bitter, legume taste. Oats, typically reserved for gruel and porridge, particularly in northern climes like Scotland, Scandinavia, and parts of Ireland, might also be incorporated into bread recipes, producing a crumbly yet nourishing loaf. And in specific regions, buckwheat, with its unique, somewhat nutty flavor and distinct dark hue, played a role, especially in Eastern Europe, contributing to a darker, more compact bread that held its moisture well. The phrase, "maslin bread," common in England, referred to a blend of wheat and rye, offering a compromise between the desired qualities of wheat and the hardiness of rye, often consumed by those just above the poorest peasants, representing a slight step up in quality and taste. Each of these grain choices reflected not just agricultural suitability, but also the precise nuances of social standing and economic reality. The milling process itself further contributed to the bread's rugged character, providing a textural experience quite different from our modern expectations. Flour was often ground using simple quern stones at home, or more commonly, larger water or wind-powered mills in the village. These traditional methods were far less efficient at separating the bran and germ from the endosperm compared to modern industrial milling. As a result, the flour would contain a significant amount of the outer layers of the grain, contributing to its darker color, higher fiber content, and rougher texture. Crucially, these less refined milling techniques often meant that tiny fragments of the millstones themselves, or small bits of grit and chaff from the grain, would find their way into the flour. This pervasive presence of abrasive particles meant that the consumption of medieval peasant bread, day in and day out, contributed to significant wear and tear on the teeth. Archaeological studies of medieval skeletal remains frequently reveal teeth that are worn down, sometimes dramatically, even to the pulp, leading to abscesses and pain. This dental attrition was a common, unavoidable reality, a quiet, physical testament to the demanding nature of their staple food and the limits of medieval technology. The sounds of the millstone, a rhythmic grinding, would have been a constant, reassuring backdrop to village life, signaling the continuous transformation of raw grain into vital flour. The act of baking, for most peasant households, was not an isolated, domestic chore, but a profound communal affair. Few individual peasant dwellings possessed their own dedicated oven. Constructing and maintaining a large, efficient oven was an expensive undertaking, requiring significant masonry skills and a considerable amount of firewood, which itself was a precious commodity, often subject to feudal rights and restrictions. Instead, villages typically shared a large, central communal oven, often located near the center of the settlement. This oven was usually owned and managed by the local lord, who might have built it as a source of revenue and control, or by a designated village baker, who would levy a small fee for its use. This fee might be in the form of coin, but more often it would be a portion of the prepared dough or a baked loaf, a tangible share of the sustenance, known as baker's due. Imagine, then, the rhythmic activity that would unfold around such a shared baking facility. Women, often accompanied by their children who carried the smaller dough troughs, would bring their carefully prepared dough, usually shaped into rounds or ovals, resting in wooden troughs fermenting vessels called a kimnel, or on large, flat boards, sometimes covered with a linen cloth to protect them from dust and insects. The air surrounding the communal oven would be thick with a blend of scents, the earthy, yeasty aroma of fermenting dough, the pungent smell of burning wood as the oven was fired, and the faint, sweet promise of warming grain as the heat built up. The heat radiating from the massive stone structure would be palpable, a comforting presence, especially on cooler mornings, drawing people closer. Each family would wait their turn, engaging in quiet conversation, exchanging news of the village, discussing the weather's impact on crops, sharing small moments of daily life, or perhaps even gossiping about local affairs. This was not merely a practical arrangement for baking. It was a vital social hub, a place where community bonds were subtly reinforced, and where shared hardships and small joys were quietly acknowledged. The gentle thud as each loaf was carefully placed into the roaring hot oven using a long wooden peel, its surface often scorched by the intense heat, and the satisfying crackle of the crust as the freshly baked, steaming loaves emerged. Cooling on racks outside, these were the pervasive, grounding sounds of medieval survival, a constant reminder of the cycle of life and labor. For many, the warm, fresh, baked bread of baking day would be a rare and cherished treat. Its crust crisp and golden, its interior soft and aromatic, only to slowly harden over the following days into the sturdy staple for most meals until the next baking cycle. For the higher echelons of medieval society, the powerful nobility, the burgeoning class of wealthy merchants, and the influential clergy, the bread that graced their tables assumed a distinctly different character, reflecting their elevated status and economic power. Their privilege allowed them preferential access to wheat, the most prized of grains, which yielded a significantly lighter, whiter, and finer loaf. This was the quintessential manchet, bread, a term that itself speaks to its superior quality and refinement. The very whiteness of this bread was a potent visual indicator of wealth and privilege. Its immaculate hue signified that the flour had undergone a much more rigorous and extensive sifting process, often through very fine silk cloths, sometimes multiple times. This additional labor, requiring more sophisticated sieves and skilled workers, and the inherent purity of the wheat, commanded a much higher price, making it utterly unattainable for the common person. The visual contrast between a noble's white loaf and a peasant's dark loaf would have been immediately apparent and deeply symbolic. Imagine, then, the sensation of slicing into a manchet loaf. It would be notably softer, with a tender crumb and a more delicate, perhaps almost imperceptible, crust yielding gently under the knife compared to the sturdy, resistant texture of the peasant's rye. These noble breads might also be subtly refined with additional ingredients, such as a touch of expensive spice, watch perhaps a hint of cinnamon or ginger, a touch of rendered animal fat or butter for richness, or even a small amount of milk or eggs if the household could afford such rare luxuries. Sometimes the bakers in grand households, operating in dedicated, often elaborate, bakehouses within the castle or manor, would sculpt these precious loaves into intricate, decorative forms, perhaps a twisted knot, a stylized animal, or a heraldic symbol, further showcasing their artistry and the extravagant tastes of the host. This meticulous care taken in the production and presentation of this finer bread was a quiet, yet unmistakable testament to the elevated social standing of those who consumed it, a visual and tactile contrast to the dark, coarse loaves of the masses. Another term for this high-quality bread was pain de main, so literally bread of hand, suggesting it was so fine it could be kneaded by hand with great care, or perhaps handled with particular delicacy at the table. These were loaves baked not just for sustenance, but for prestige. Beyond its direct consumption, bread played another incredibly significant, yet often overlooked, role at the medieval table, particularly within noble households, the trencher. This was far more than just an economical choice born of scarcity. It was a foundational element of medieval dining, a precursor to the widespread use of individual ceramic or metal plates that would become common in later centuries. Picture a thick, often square, cut slice of coarse, typically stale, bread, perhaps 2 or 3 days old, placed directly onto the polished wooden surface of the dining table. Upon this humble trencher, a term derived from the Old French tranchia, meaning to cut or slice, would be piled the cooked meats, simmering stews, or other savory dishes from the main courses. As the meal progressed, which, especially during grand banquets, could be a lengthy and multi-course affair lasting for hours, the bread trencher would slowly, gradually absorb the rich juices, savory fats, and intense flavors of the food placed upon it. It transformed from a simple, dry base into a remarkably rich, flavorful, and yielding accompaniment, a savory sponge infused with the very essence of the meal. Imagine the subtle seep of broth, the quiet soak of rendered fat from a roasted game bird, slowly permeating the porous bread, transforming its texture and taste into a highly flavored, almost pudding-like consistency. Once the main courses had been consumed, and the noble diner had finished eating from their trencher, this now laden, flavor-infused slice of bread was rarely consumed by the lord or lady themselves. Instead, it would be carefully gathered up by servants, often into specific baskets or containers. These broken meats, the scraps of food left on the trencher, along with the saturated trencher bread itself, were then typically distributed to the poor waiting outside the castle gates, or given as sustenance to the household's dogs. or even to pigs kept in the castle's immediate vicinity. This practice served multiple, interconnected purposes. It was, at its heart, an act of charity, fulfilling a moral and religious obligation for the wealthy to provide for the less fortunate, a tangible expression of Christian alms, giving that was both visible and socially expected. It was also a highly practical way to manage food waste, ensuring that virtually no caloric value was truly lost in an era where resources were precious and wastefulness was frowned upon. Furthermore, it subtly yet powerfully reinforced the social order, with the leftovers and discarded elements of the rich directly sustaining the less privileged, a visible and daily reminder of the pervasive inequalities that structured medieval society. The trencher, therefore, was a humble yet profoundly symbolic element of medieval life, a testament to practicality, economy, social hierarchy, and the deep, pervasive reliance on every available resource, all embodied in a simple piece of bread. Even at the most opulent of banquets, where platters of exquisite food might be ceremoniously passed down from the high table, the trencher remained a consistent and vital element, silently supporting the more celebrated and visually striking dishes. Its quiet presence on every table, regardless of social standing, underscores its foundational importance. The entire cycle of bread production, from the arduous labor of planting seeds in the spring, nurturing the growing crops through the summer, and finally the back-breaking work of harvesting in late summer or early autumn, to the subsequent processes of threshing, separating grain from stalk, winnowing, removing chaff, milling, and finally baking, was a ceaseless and utterly vital rhythm that dictated the flow of medieval life. The unpredictable nature of weather patterns, the constant threat of disease or pests impacting crop yields, a single blight could devastate a region, and the fluctuating availability of skilled labor profoundly impacted both the quality and the sheer quantity of available bread. A single bad harvest, perhaps due to a prolonged drought or excessive rain, could trigger widespread hunger, even full-blown famine, leading to desperate measures and immense suffering, underscoring just how precarious existence could be for the vast majority of the population. The price of bread, and by extension, the availability of basic grain, were constant and consuming concerns for both ruler and ruled. Sudden increases in price or severe shortages often ignited social unrest, even violent rebellions, as people fought for the most basic right to sustenance. This deep connection between food supply and social stability meant that ensuring a plentiful and affordable bread supply was one of the primary responsibilities and challenges for any medieval lord or monarch. The very word, lord, is derived from the Old English laufwerd, meaning loaf, ward, or keeper of the bread, indicating the fundamental, ancient responsibility of the powerful to ensure the sustenance of their people. This linguistic connection quietly underscores the profound, almost primal, importance of bread in shaping medieval society and its governance, a silent agreement between the governed and their governors that the sustenance of life would be ensured. Even the size and weight of a standard loaf were often regulated by law to prevent bakers from cheating their customers, further indicating the bread's economic and social significance. In a world utterly devoid of the endless variety and convenience of modern foodstuffs, Without refrigeration or the global supply chains that allow us access to diverse ingredients year-round, bread stood as the unshakable constant, the singular, most reliable, and comforting presence on every table. Its earthy, wholesome aroma, whether from the communal oven or the private bakehouse, was a quiet promise of warmth, nourishment, and life itself. It was a food that effortlessly transcended the rigid social divides of the age, appearing in varying forms and qualities, yet always retaining its essential, life-giving role. From the hardened crust carried by a humble traveler on a long and uncertain journey, providing vital energy across vast and often dangerous landscapes, to the meticulously crafted, delicate loaf gracing a king's exquisitely set table, bread was the ubiquitous, silent cornerstone of medieval existence. Its enduring story is woven inextricably into the very fabric of daily life, a testament to resilience and the fundamental human need for nourishment. As we gently shift our focus from the earthy solidity of bread, its foundational role now quietly understood, we will soon discover how its fundamental flavors were enhanced and transformed by the introduction of precious and often exotic ingredients. Next, let us allow our senses to gently lead us into the quiet, aromatic world of medieval spices and herbs, and the surprising ways they brought vibrant color and complex tastes to the medieval table. Chapter 2 here, the subtle dance of spices and herbs as we gently shift our focus from the earthy solidity of bread. Its foundational role now quietly understood, we will discover how its fundamental flavors were enhanced and transformed by the introduction of precious and often exotic ingredients. Let us now allow our senses to gently lead us into the quiet, aromatic world of medieval spices and herbs, and the surprising ways they brought vibrant color and complex tastes to the medieval table. Many imagine medieval food as bland, heavy, and unseasoned, a monotonous culinary landscape devoid of zest or sophistication. This is another gentle misconception that often settles quietly in our modern minds, a shadow cast by later historical narratives or perhaps a misunderstanding of a different culinary aesthetic. In truth, for those who possess the means, medieval cuisine, particularly at the aristocratic level, was a vibrant tapestry of intricate flavors, many of which would surprise us with their boldness and complexity today. It was a cuisine that prized strong contrasts, a blend of sweet and sour, rich and sharp, savory and aromatic. The key to this culinary sophistication, this elevation of the everyday into the extraordinary, lay in the meticulous and often extravagant use of spices. These precious commodities were not merely culinary additions. They were powerful symbols of wealth, status, and sophistication, silent declarations of a household's global reach and influence. Imagine, for a moment, the incredible journeys these spices undertook to reach a medieval European kitchen. Each grain of black pepper, each precious quill of cinnamon, each delicate bud of clove, each aromatic thread of saffron represented an immense voyage across vast geographical distances. They traveled from the verdant lands of India, particularly the Malabar coast for pepper, the sun-baked shores of Africa for various gums and exotic peppers, and the distant, mysterious islands of Southeast Asia, the famed Spice Islands, like the Moluccas for cloves and nutmeg places that existed only in rumor, fantastical travelogues, and whispered legends for most Europeans. Their passage involved traversing treacherous desert routes, enduring long sea voyages across unpredictable oceans, braving pirates and storms, and passing through countless hands of merchants, traders, and middlemen, from Arab traders to Venetian or Genoese merchants to local wholesalers. Every single spice, therefore, carried with it a story of adventure, risk, immense profit, and profound cultural exchange, a testament to the intricate networks of medieval trade that connected distant worlds. To serve a dish heavily laden with these exotic treasures was to subtly yet powerfully announce to one's guests, without a single spoken word, the host's immense prosperity, their expansive connections to distant lands, and their remarkable ability to command rare resources from across the known world. It was a tangible display of global reach and economic power, served on a platter. Consider the subtle, yet potent, presence of saffron. This isn't merely a flavoring, it is a dye, and a deeply symbolic one at that. Derived from the dried stigmas of the saffron crocus, it was, and remains one of the world's most expensive spices due to the labor-intensive harvesting process. A medieval cook, often a highly skilled professional in a noble household, would employ saffron not just for its unique, subtly earthy, almost honey-like flavor, a taste both delicate and profound, but, crucially, for the rich, radiant golden hue it imparted to dishes. Imagine a dish of roasted poultry, its skin gleaming with a golden luster, almost like burnished gold, perhaps arranged on a platter to catch the candlelight, or a delicate custard shimmering with an internal glow of vibrant yellow, orange, all thanks to a few carefully measured strands of saffron. This visual splendor was paramount. Medieval dining was a multisensory experience, where the appearance of food was almost as important as its taste. Colors held significant symbolic meaning in medieval culture. Gold, for instance, could represent divinity, wealth, purity, or even royal authority. Thus, a vibrant, artfully presented dish, made luminous with saffron, spoke volumes about the skill of the cook and the boundless generosity and sophistication of the patron. Saffron, therefore, was a quiet, golden declaration of luxury, transforming seemingly ordinary ingredients into a visual and gustatory masterpiece, an edible jewel. It was not uncommon for medieval recipes to specify colored gold as a desired outcome, with saffron being the primary means to achieve this opulent effect, underscoring this attention to visual detail and the presentation of food as a form of art. Beyond the more commonly recognized spices we still use today, the medieval pantry held a fascinating array of other aromatics, many of which are less familiar to the modern palate. There was galingale, for instance, a rhizome similar in appearance to ginger, but possessing a distinctly different flavor profile, more floral, intensely peppery, and with a pronounced citrusy, almost piney note. It was often employed in savory dishes, adding a sharp, refreshing edge that cut through the richness of meats and stews, and sometimes found its way into medieval beverages. Imagine its subtle bitterness providing a fascinating counterpoint to the sweetness of other ingredients that might also be present in a complex sauce. Then there were grains of paradise, sometimes referred to as Aphramomum melegueta, a spice related to ginger and cardamom, offering a warming, peppery, and slightly floral heat, with hints of citrus and wood smoke. These were often used as a cheaper alternative to black pepper, particularly when pepper supplies were scarce or prices soared. But they possessed their own unique and valued character, sometimes favored for specific culinary effects rather than mere cost saving. These weren't mere substitutions. They offered distinct profiles, contributing to a truly diverse and sophisticated palate that constantly sought new combinations and sensations. The use of exotic spices extended even to drinks, with spiced wines like Hippocras being particularly popular for their warming, aromatic qualities. Imagine the complex layers of flavor as cinnamon, ginger, cardamom, long pepper, and a touch of honey slowly infused into a rich red wine, often steeped over several days and served gently warmed at the end of a long meal, believed to aid digestion and soothe the senses. These beverages were liquid luxury, a delightful conclusion to any grand repast, and often served as a social lubricant. Another fascinating spice used in medieval cooking was cubeb, sometimes called tailed pepper, which was the dried fruit of a plant related to black pepper. It possessed a pungent, slightly camphorous, and woody flavor, often used to flavor both savory and sweet dishes, and even finding its way into medieval medicines for its perceived warming properties. The subtle complexities that these lesser-known spices brought to the table suggest a profound experimentation and appreciation for nuanced flavor combinations. Nutmeg and mace derived from the same fruit, mace is the aril surrounding the nutmeg seed, were also highly prized, particularly in more delicate dishes like custards, sauces, and even some types of medieval pastry. Their warm, sweet, and slightly woody notes would have added a comforting richness and depth to many preparations. The distinct, almost medicinal aroma of cloves, too, was highly valued, used both in savory roasts and in sweet preparations, often lending a powerful, unmistakable character to dishes. Its strong flavor meant it was used sparingly but effectively. The very act of grinding these whole spices, perhaps with a mortar and pestle made of stone or bronze, would have been a common sound in a noble kitchen, releasing their potent, concentrated aromas into the air, a quiet prelude to the sensory experience awaiting the diners. The fine dust of the ground spice, painstakingly prepared, was a testament to the labor and care involved. It's important to gently dislodge a persistent and common myth that spices were primarily used in the Middle Ages to mask the taste of spoiled food. This notion is a curious historical misunderstanding, likely a simplification born from later periods or a misinterpretation of medieval texts. While food preservation was indeed a constant and formidable challenge in the medieval era, and spoilage was an unavoidable reality that cooks continually battled, medieval people were far from ignorant about the taste of rancid or rotten food. They were not attempting to make spoiled food palatable. In fact, they understood the dangers and unpleasantness of consuming such fare, and severe penalties could be levied against those who sold tainted food in markets. Rather, medieval cooks went to considerable lengths to ensure their ingredients were as fresh as possible, employing sophisticated methods like salting, smoking, drying, and pickling to preserve meats, fish, and vegetables through the leaner seasons. Spices, when used, were almost universally intended to enhance, to add complexity, to transform the raw ingredients into something more refined, impressive, and often visually appealing. Imagine the subtle notes of nutmeg enhancing a creamy, savory pottage, its warmth gently enveloping the other ingredients and enriching the texture, or the comforting embrace of cloves bringing an unexpected depth to a perfectly roasted capon, its skin crisp to a golden hue. The careful balancing of flavors, the intricate combinations of sweet and sour, savory and aromatic, speak to a sophisticated culinary understanding and an artistic intent, rather than a desperate attempt to cover up decay. Guilds of spice merchants, cooks, and apothecaries would have been keen to maintain the integrity and quality of their precious wares, as their reputation rested on the purity and potency of their products. Records of royal kitchens and monastic infirmaries meticulously detailing spice use, often alongside their perceived medicinal properties, further support their role as esteemed and valued ingredients, not mere disguises. The immense value placed on these imports also made their frivolous use on spoiled food highly improbable. Alongside these magnificent, often exorbitantly expensive imports, the more readily available herbs played a crucial, grounding, an equally essential role in medieval cuisine. These were the flavors of the local earth, the familiar aromas that tethered the exotic to the everyday. They were cultivated in humble kitchen gardens, carefully tended by household members, often women of the house, or diligently gathered from the wild, abundant fields and forests surrounding villages. Unlike the far-flung origins of spices, herbs were tangible, immediate, and accessible to nearly everyone, though the variety available to a peasant would be much smaller than that in a monastic or noble garden, which might contain hundreds of varieties. Rosemary, with its distinctive piney, aromatic, and slightly bitter scent, was a popular choice, often paired with roasted meats or poultry, its robust flavor standing up well to cooking and adding a Mediterranean freshness. It was also believed to aid memory. Thyme, earthy and subtly minty, would often find its way into hearty stews and vegetable pottages, adding a comforting depth and warmth. Its ability to withstand long cooking times made it ideal for slow, simmered dishes, where its flavors could slowly infuse. Sage, with its unique, slightly bitter, and pungent flavor, was frequently used with fatty meats like pork or goose, as it was traditionally believed to aid in their digestion, helping to cut through the richness of the fat. And parsley, with its fresh, vibrant, and slightly peppery notes, often served as a simple yet effective garnish, adding a touch of bright color and a hint of freshness to otherwise rich or heavy dishes. Its mild flavor also made it a versatile addition to many savory preparations, from sauces to stuffings. Other common herbs included mint, used in sauces and to flavor drinks, often for its cooling properties, dill, frequently paired with fish and certain vegetables, fennel, for its anisey sweetness, sometimes eaten raw or used in savory dishes, and various types of cabbage and leeks, which, while primarily vegetables, provided significant background flavor and bulk to many peasant dishes. These commonplace herbs, though lacking the prestige of imported spices, were the unsung heroes of the medieval kitchen, providing the essential, familiar flavor notes that anchored the grander, more exotic creations within a recognizable local palate. They were the background chorus that allowed the soloists of the spices to shine. The difference in how spices and herbs were employed starkly reflected the pronounced social stratification of the time. For the peasant, their meals revolved around the fundamental flavors of their limited ingredients, the deep, satisfying earthiness of coarsely ground grains, the often robust, occasionally bitter, taste of root vegetables like carrots, parsnips, and turnips, and the subtle, fresh notes of wild herbs and whatever greens could be foraged or grown in small garden plots. Their daily stews and gruels, while nourishing, would be flavored with the readily available staples such as onions, garlic, and locally grown herbs, creating a comforting, but certainly less elaborate or varied, palate. Imagine a simple cabbage pottage, perhaps with a few wild sorrel leaves for tang and a handful of wild garlic for punch, providing the warmth and essential nutrition needed after a long, arduous day in the fields. Its flavors dictated by the immediate bounty of the season and the land. Their ingenuity lay in making the most of what was at hand, creating hearty, sustaining meals from humble ingredients, often relying on fermentation for subtle flavor development. In stark contrast, the aristocratic kitchen was, in many ways, a vibrant laboratory of flavor, a place where culinary artistry was pushed to its limits, driven by the desire for novelty and prestige. Cooks in noble households, often highly skilled professionals whose expertise was greatly valued and who sometimes enjoyed considerable status, were masters in the intricate art of blending and balancing these expensive spices. They created complex sauces, elaborate preparations, and visually stunning dishes that were a far cry from simple sustenance. Dishes might be meticulously categorized and described with terms like poudre d'ouse, sweet powdered, or poudre fort, a strong powder, indicating the specific spice blends intended for different culinary effects, a gentle, aromatic blend with cinnamon, ginger, and sugar for a delicate dessert or a sweet sauce for roasted fruit, for instance, contrasted with a pungent, peppery blend, perhaps incorporating long pepper, cubeb, and nutmeg for a robust meat dish. The layering of these flavors, the subtle contrasts and harmonies, speaks to a sophisticated culinary understanding and an artistic intent that utterly belays the common perception of medieval food as uninspired. Cookbooks from this era, though rare and highly valued, contained intricate recipes that demanded skill, patience, and access to a wide array of costly ingredients. These texts, like Les Viandières, a French cookbook attributed to Guillaume Tyrrell or Taillevent, a cook for French kings, compiled in the late 14th century, or The Forme of Curies, an English collection from the cooks of King Richard II, dating to around 1390, offer a quiet glimpse into the complex gastronomic aspirations of the medieval elite, revealing detailed instructions for everything from complex meat dishes to elaborate fruit tarts, all heavily reliant on the careful application of spices and often colored for visual impact. The very act of preparing these spiced dishes in a noble kitchen was a production in itself. Spices would often be bought whole, then carefully ground in mortars and pestles, a laborious but essential step that released their maximum aroma and flavor. Imagine the rhythmic thudding of a heavy pestle, the subtle release of fragrant dust into the air, creating an intoxicating scent that would permeate the kitchen, a blend of warmth and exoticism. The spices would then be carefully measured, often by hand, and incorporated into sauces that might be thickened with breadcrumbs, egg yolks, or ground almonds, another expensive and valued ingredient. The goal was not just flavor, but often a smooth, uniform texture and a beautiful, consistent color, frequently enhanced by saffron or other natural dyes. This attention to detail, from the selection of the raw spice to its final presentation, underscores the immense value placed on these ingredients and the high level of culinary skill involved in their transformation. Even the waste from spice preparation, though minimal, might be carefully managed or repurposed. In essence, the medieval palate was a fascinating dichotomy deeply rooted in local, seasonal produce for the majority, a direct reflection of their immediate environment and the rhythms of the earth, yet capable of extraordinary global reach and sophisticated flavor for the privileged few, a testament to their influence and wealth. The gentle dance of spices, rare, precious, and symbolic, combined with the grounding, familiar presence of herbs, created a culinary landscape that was far from bland. Instead, it was a subtle, aromatic reflection of the vast and varied world from which its ingredients were drawn, a quiet testament to trade, hierarchy, and the enduring human desire to elevate simple nourishment into something truly extraordinary. It reminds us that even in an age of perceived simplicity, the pursuit of flavor and the joy of a well-prepared meal held profound significance, offering a rich sensory experience that transcended mere physical hunger. Having now gently explored the vibrant and complex world of medieval spices and herbs, our journey will soon turn to the substantial heart of many meals, the presence and absence of meat, and the powerful influence of the Church on dietary choices. Next, let us quietly consider how these factors shaped what truly appeared on the medieval table. Chapter 3: They meet, fish, and the Church's influence. Having now gently explored the vibrant and complex world of medieval spices and herbs, our journey will soon turn to the substantial heart of many meals, the presence and absence of meat, and the powerful influence of the Church on dietary choices. Let us quietly consider how these factors shaped what truly appeared on the medieval table. When we picture medieval banquets, our minds often conjure vivid images of vast quantities of meat, whole roasted animals, platters overflowing with succulent joints, a testament to unbridled abundance. While such extravagant displays of meat certainly did occur, and were indeed a hallmark of the most opulent feasts, their presence and consumption were far more regulated, nuanced, and often surprisingly limited for the majority of the population than our romanticized visions might suggest. This reality was shaped by two powerful forces: the stark economic realities of the age and the pervasive, undeniable influence of the Christian Church. Firstly, and perhaps most fundamentally, meat was expensive. In a pre-industrial agricultural economy, raising livestock required significant resources, extensive land for grazing, feed, especially during winter months when natural forage was scarce, considerable labor for tending, and substantial time for growth to maturity. Animals like cows, sheep, and pigs were not merely sources of meat, they were valuable, multi-purpose assets, providing essential products like milk for dairy, wool for textiles, hides for leather goods, and invaluable labor as draft animals for plowing and transport throughout their lives. To slaughter such an animal for its meat was to convert a living, productive, long-term asset into a single, perishable food item. This decision was never taken lightly. This made meat, particularly the prime cuts, a profound luxury. For the vast majority of the population, the humble peasants who comprised perhaps 80–90% of medieval society, meat was a rare indulgence, a treat reserved for specific, significant occasions rather than a daily staple. Imagine the quiet anticipation of such a rare culinary moment. Perhaps a piece of cured bacon carefully sliced, or a small portion of salt beef, savored slowly. A marked and cherished departure from the everyday diet of grains and vegetables. A peasant's diet, as we briefly touched upon in our discussion of bread, was predominantly centered on grains, pulses, and vegetables, reflecting what could be grown locally and efficiently. Their protein intake primarily came from more accessible and sustainable sources. Pulses, such as peas, broad beans like fava beans, and lentils, were vital. They were easy to grow, provided essential protein for energy and growth, and, crucially, could be dried and stored for extended periods, offering reliable nourishment through the long winter months when fresh produce was scarce. These legumes would be incorporated into thick, hearty pottages, robust soups, or even occasionally ground into flour for bread, acting as an indispensable protein backbone for a physically demanding life. If a peasant family was fortunate enough to keep a few chickens, eggs provided another valuable, renewable source of protein, easily gathered and consumed, often boiled or added to pottages. And for many, particularly those living near rivers, lakes, or coastal areas, fish was an indispensable food, offering a reliable and often more accessible form of protein not subject to the same strictures as meat. Even landlocked villages, far from the sea, often had purpose-built fish ponds, carefully managed and stocked with freshwater species like carp, pike, or eels. These ponds were a significant investment, demonstrating the vital necessity of protein sources beyond traditional livestock, a testament to medieval agricultural ingenuity. The upkeep of these ponds, from digging to maintaining optimal water levels and preventing poaching, reflected the immense value placed on this aquatic resource. Fish, whether consumed fresh or more commonly preserved through salting or drying, formed a cornerstone of the diet for vast numbers of people across all social strata, especially given the pervasive religious mandates we will now explore. The second, and perhaps even more pervasive, influence on meat consumption was the Christian Church. In medieval Europe, the rhythm of the year, indeed the very fabric of daily life, was intrinsically linked to religious observance, and this profoundly dictated dietary practices for all social classes, from the lowliest serf to the most powerful monarch. The concept of fasting extended far beyond the solemn and well-known period of Lent, which alone spanned 40 days before Easter, a time of profound spiritual reflection and physical abstinence. Fasting was a pervasive aspect of medieval life, woven into the weekly and seasonal calendar with remarkable consistency. These dietary prohibitions were not merely suggestions or optional acts of piety. They were enforceable rules, part of canon law. Failure to observe them could lead to public penance, fines, or in extreme cases, even excommunication, a severe spiritual penalty that cast an individual out of the Christian community. Fridays, universally across Latin Christendom, were fish days, commemorating the crucifixion of Christ. This meant no meat was to be consumed. Many Christians also observed strict abstinence from meat on Saturdays, often in honor of the Virgin Mary and as preparation for the Lord's Day, and frequently on Wednesdays as well, though the Wednesday fast was sometimes relaxed for laypeople depending on specific regional custom or the demands of heavy labor. Adding to these weekly fasts were numerous saints' days, each saint often having a specific feast day that might be a fast or feast, depending on its importance. Vigils, the eve of a major feast day, which itself was a mandatory fasting day, and Ember days, quarterly periods of prayer and fasting, typically observed for 3 consecutive days within each of the 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. These often coincided with agricultural cycles like planting and harvest, linking spiritual observance to the rhythms of the earth. When one totals these days, it becomes strikingly clear that a significant portion of the medieval calendar, sometimes exceeding half the year, depending on the specific region, the particular historical period, and the strictness of local interpretation, was designated as fast days or fish days. For example, some monastic orders observed continuous, stricter fasts than the general populace, enduring long periods without meat, adhering to a particularly ascetic lifestyle. On these designated days, the consumption of meat, which encompassed all warm-blooded animals, also including beef, pork, mutton, venison, and even fowl like chicken, duck, and geese, was strictly forbidden by ecclesiastical law. This prohibition extended beyond mere flesh to sometimes include animal products like lard or suet used in cooking, requiring cooks to find alternative fats such as olive oils, where available and affordable, often imported from southern Europe. Nut oils like walnut or hazelnut oil, or various fish oils. In the strictest periods and during the most intense fasts, particularly the height of Lent, even dairy products such as milk, butter, cheese, and eggs were prohibited, pushing the populace towards an almost entirely plant-based diet supplemented by fish. This meant that even the wealthiest households, despite their vast resources and their desire for lavish displays, had to adapt their menus significantly, showcasing their ingenuity within these religious constraints. Imagine the medieval cook, a master of his craft, faced with the daunting challenge of preparing an elaborate, multi-course banquet that adheres strictly to these complex and often demanding dietary rules without sacrificing prestige or flavor, often tasked with making the forbidden foods, fish, appear as desirable as meat, instead of the grand roast boar or deer, which would typically be the magnificent centerpiece of a flesh day feast. The focal point of a Lenten or Friday meal might be an astonishingly intricate fish pie, often baked in a rich pastry crust and sometimes cleverly shaped to resemble an animal, almost like a culinary illusion designed to satisfy both the stomach and the mind. Or picture elaborate preparations of various aquatic creatures, eels, highly prized for their rich, fatty flesh and often served in pies or stews, or even roasted lampreys, a type of jawless fish resembling an eel, often prepared in savory sauces with spices and wine. A dish fit for kings. King Henry I of England famously died from a surfeit of lampreys, consumed during a fasting period, highlighting their richness. Delicate salmon from northern rivers, perhaps poached or smoked, or robust cod, often salted and dried for preservation and then rehydrated, providing a reliable source of protein for even inland communities far from the sea. These fish were not merely boiled in a simplistic manner. Medieval chefs went to great lengths to make them appealing and varied. They might be roasted, fried in oil, grilled over coals, smoked for flavor and preservation, or prepared in rich, complex sauces, often heavily spiced to compensate for the absence of meat and to elevate the dish to a level of culinary sophistication suitable for a noble table. For the nobility, exotic fish or shellfish, transported at great expense from distant waters, such as oysters, mussels, or even imported varieties, might feature prominently, serving as yet another subtle indicator of wealth and access. The variety of fish consumed was astounding, encompassing fresh and saltwater species, from freshwater pike, trout, and carp to marine herring, mackerel, and haddock, demonstrating a deep knowledge of aquatic life and inventive preparation methods that often transformed the very nature of the ingredients. The fish trade networks, from the North Sea fisheries to inland river systems, were immense and vital, ensuring that these religious dietary laws could be widely observed across the continent. Monasteries, with their extensive fish ponds, were particularly adept at providing diverse fish-based meals. The types of meat actually consumed also reveal intriguing details about medieval life and the availability of resources. While the iconic wild boar and venison of deer meat are often associated with noble feasts, suggesting a romanticized image of the hunt as a primary source of sustenance, these were often highly controlled commodities. Hunting large game was more than just a means of acquiring food. It was a sport, a display of martial prowess, and a privilege almost exclusively reserved for the aristocracy. The vast royal forests and hunting grounds were strictly managed by foresters and gamekeepers, and poaching by peasants was severely punished, sometimes even with mutilation or death, underscoring the exclusivity of this resource. Thus, while wild game was certainly consumed at noble tables, it was often acquired through organized hunts, a ceremonial act, and often served as a grand centerpiece for specific celebrations rather than forming a regular part of daily sustenance. For more everyday meat consumption in households that could afford it, domesticated animals formed the backbone of the diet. Pork was particularly popular and ubiquitous due to its versatility and the relative ease with which pigs could be raised. Pigs were hardy animals that could consume a varied diet, including forest forage, acorns, and nuts during the pannage season, and household scraps, making them economical to keep. Their meat could be easily preserved through salting and smoking, ensuring a supply through the winter months when fresh slaughter was less common and fresh forage for animals was scarce. This made bacon, cured hams, and various sausages a common and valuable presence in larders. Beef and mutton, sheep meat were also common, often coming from older animals that had served their primary purpose as draft animals for plowing or for wool production before being slaughtered for meat. This dual purpose use of livestock was a practical economic reality for farmers, ensuring maximum utility from their animals. Chicken, being ubiquitous and relatively easy to keep and breed, provided both meat and a consistent supply of eggs. making it a reliable protein source for many levels of society. Other fowl like ducks, geese, and various game birds, tills, partridges, pheasants. Quails would also be consumed, particularly by the wealthier classes, either from organized hunting or from being specially raised in manor farms. Even visually impressive birds like swans and peacocks, while less common for consumption, were sometimes roasted and presented at banquets, meticulously dressed in their feathers, as a magnificent visual spectacle more than a practical food source, often serving as a sautelti themselves. Preparation methods for these meats were remarkably diverse, reflecting both necessity and culinary skill. Roasting over an open fire, a technique that speaks to primal instincts and evoked a sense of abundance and directness, was certainly common for larger cuts of meat, especially for banquets. Imagine the rhythmic turning of a spit by a cook or a turnspit dog, a small dog bred to run in a wheel. Turning the spit, the crackle of the fire, and the rich, savory aroma filling the great hall, a true sensory experience, but equally prevalent, and perhaps more common for daily consumption in most households, were stews and pottages. These slow, simmered dishes allowed for economical use of tougher, less desirable cuts of meat and extended small amounts of meat with generous quantities of vegetables, grains, and herbs, creating hearty, nourishing meals that could feed many. Pies were also incredibly versatile, encasing savory fillings of meat or fish in sturdy pastry crusts. These crusts served not only as a vessel for cooking, but also as a form of rudimentary preservation, protecting the contents from air and spoilage, making them ideal for travel or storage. The pastry itself might be inedible, simply a container. Frumenti, a thick porridge of cracked wheat, often enriched with milk, eggs, and spices, was a common accompaniment, often served with venison or other meats, offering a comforting, hearty base that absorbed the rich flavors of the accompanying dish. The commitment to zero waste was not a philosophical choice, but a fundamental principle of survival, driven by necessity and ingrained agricultural practices. As mentioned earlier, every single part of the slaughtered animal, from snout to tail, from the organs to the very bones, was meticulously utilized. Blood was collected for blood puddings and sausages, often mixed with oatmeal or barley, providing a rich, iron-filled food. Intestines were cleaned and used for sausage casings, or in specific dishes. The various offal liver, kidneys, heart, lungs, brains, and tongue were highly valued for their nutritional content and distinctive flavors, often incorporated into pottages, pâtés, or specialty dishes like medieval haggis. Fats are lard. Suet was rendered for cooking, for making candles, or for soap. A precious resource in itself, particularly when olive oil was scarce. Even the bones were boiled repeatedly to extract every last bit of marrow and flavor for rich broths and stocks, which formed the base of many sauces and soups, contributing depth and body. This holistic approach to animal consumption stands in stark contrast to modern practices, where much of the animal is often discarded. It reflects a deep, ingrained respect for sustenance, born from centuries of living close to the land and understanding the preciousness of every resource. It was a testament to the ingenious efficiency driven by scarcity, where every ounce of sustenance was valued and used, a practice that echoes even into modern nose-to-tail cooking movements. the logistics of providing meat for large noble households. Particularly fortified castles were immense and intricate, requiring a dedicated staff and careful planning. Animals might be slaughtered on site in the castle's dedicated slaughterhouse or courtyard, or purchased live from local markets and driven to the castle to be kept in holding pens until needed. Preservation was a constant and pressing challenge. Salting, often done with large quantities of coarse salt, was a primary method for preserving meats like beef and pork, creating durable, long-lasting provisions. Imagine vast quantities of salted meat, stacked or hanging to cure in dedicated larders or cool, dark cellars, their pungent aroma filling the storage spaces. Smoking also provided preservation and imparted a distinct flavor, often used for hams, bacon, and certain types of fish. These methods ensured a continuous supply of meat through the lean winter months, when fresh slaughter was less common and fresh forage for animals was scarce and transportation of goods could be difficult. The role of the larderer, simus or larderius, in a great household was critical. Managing these precious stores and overseeing their proper preservation, a position of significant trust and responsibility within the kitchen staff. So, while the image of the opulent medieval meat feast remains powerfully ingrained in our popular imagination, let us gently adjust that picture. It was a world where meat was a privilege rather than a guaranteed right, a marker of status more than a daily staple. Fish was a frequent, versatile, and often elaborately prepared substitute, its importance elevated by necessity and religious law. And the pervasive, all-encompassing influence of the Church quietly yet firmly guided dietary choices for all, from the humblest peasant working the land to the mightiest king seated at his high table. The medieval table, in its quiet adherence to these rhythms of feast and fast, scarcity and plenty, offers a fascinating and deeply human glimpse into a past where food was far more than mere sustenance. It was a profound reflection of faith, economy, daily survival, and the intricate dance between human desire and divine decree. It speaks volumes about the ingenuity required to simply feed a population in an era of limited technology. Chapter 4. The flow of medieval drinks, having now gently examined the role of meat and fish and the powerful dietary regulations of the Church. Our journey will next flow towards the liquids that accompanied these meals. Let us quietly consider the fascinating array of drinks that quenched thirst, provided nourishment, and shaped the social fabric of medieval life. When we consider medieval beverages, a common and persistent notion often arises. The idea that medieval people drank copious amounts of alcohol, such as ale or wine, primarily because water was universally unsafe to drink. This is a charming, yet somewhat simplistic and gently exaggerated notion that we can now quietly set aside. While it is indeed true that many urban water sources, particularly in densely populated cities and larger towns, could be contaminated with waste, runoff, and various pathogens, leading to illness, people were by no means ignorant of this danger. They understood through observation and bitter experience that stagnant water or water drawn from suspect sources could lead to discomfort, disease, and even death. The medieval understanding of hygiene, while different from ours, was not entirely absent. They recognized links between unclean water and illness, even if they lacked a scientific understanding of microbes. Communities often relied on more reliable and cleaner water sources when available. In rural areas, this might mean drawing water from deep, freshly dug wells which tapped into underground aquifers, or from clear, flowing natural springs emerging from hillsides. These sources, if properly maintained and located away from direct contamination from human or animal waste, could provide relatively clean drinking water, especially if it was collected at the source. In larger cities, more sophisticated, albeit rudimentary, infrastructure existed. We see evidence of aqueducts inherited from Roman engineering or newly constructed during the medieval period, designed to channel fresh water from distant, purer sources, often miles away, into urban centers, supplying communal fountains and public taps where citizens could fill their buckets. The very existence of such efforts, often monumental engineering feats for their time, indicates a clear awareness of water quality and a collective desire for cleaner options. So, while a cautious approach to water was indeed prudent, and boiling for safety was a known technique, it was not the sole reason for the widespread consumption of alcoholic beverages. Instead, other factors, particularly nutritional value and social custom, played equally significant roles. The omnipresence of brewed and fermented beverages was a central and defining feature of medieval life, driven by a complex blend of practicality, nutritional needs, cultural preferences, and, yes, a degree of safety. For the vast majority of the population, from the humblest peasant to the diligent artisan, the daily drink was all. This was not the strong, intensely hopped beer that we typically consume today, with its distinct bitterness, clearer appearance, and higher alcohol content. Medieval ale was often much weaker in alcoholic content, sometimes as low as 1% or 2%, making it more akin to a liquid bread or a light, nourishing gruel. It was primarily brewed from grains such as barley, oats, or occasionally wheat, reflecting the local agricultural bounty. Crucially, in its earliest forms in England and parts of Northern Europe, all did not initially contain hops. Hops, with their valuable preservative qualities, which helped prevent spoilage and characteristic bitter flavor, were gradually introduced from the 11th century onwards, gaining widespread adoption first in Northern Europe, especially in the Low Countries and Germany, where beer gained popularity, and slowly spreading southward over the centuries. Before hops, other bittering agents and flavorings, like groot, a mixture of herbs and spices such as bog myrtle, yarrow, rosemary, and juniper berries, were used, often giving ales a sweet, spiced, or even slightly resinous taste. The brewing process itself fundamentally involved boiling the water. This crucial step naturally sterilized the water, killing off most harmful bacteria and making the resulting ale a far safer and more reliable source of hydration than many unboiled, untreated water sources, especially in an era without modern sanitation. This small ale, or table ale, as it was sometimes known due to its lower alcohol content, was a fundamental part of the daily diet. It provided not just liquid, but also essential calories and some vital nutrients, particularly B vitamins from the yeast, making it a significant source of daily energy for a physically active population. Imagine starting your day, not with the invigorating jolt of coffee or the comforting warmth of tea, but with a mild, slightly sweet, and perhaps somewhat thin ale, consumed from a simple earthenware mug or wooden tankard. This was the norm, consumed at all meals, breakfast, dinner, the main midday meal, and supper, and often intermittently throughout the demanding working day, in the fields or workshops, by men, women, and even children, who drank an even weaker, more watery version known as a small beer, or a thin ale. Brewing ale was often a domestic task, primarily performed by women within the household, contributing significantly to the household economy and ensuring a continuous supply of this essential beverage. The brewing vat, with its gentle bubbling and yeasty aroma, would have been a familiar sight and smell in many homes and monastic institutions. As we gently move our gaze up the intricate social ladder, the beverage landscape subtly shifts, and wine enters the picture, becoming the predominant drink for the nobility, the wealthy merchants, and the influential clergy. This was particularly true in the grape-growing regions of southern Europe, such as France, especially Burgundy, Bordeaux, and Champagne, Italy, and Spain, where vineyards flourished and wine production was deeply ingrained in the culture. Unlike many modern wines, medieval wines were often consumed relatively young and unaged, as long-term storage conditions and sophisticated preservation techniques, like bottling with airtight corks, were rudimentary. They could, therefore, be quite harsh, acidic, or prone to spoiling quickly if not handled properly. To counteract these qualities and to enhance their appeal, wines were frequently spiced or, in some cases, diluted with water for daily consumption, especially by servants or during less formal occasions, a common practice known as watering down. Imagine a rich red wine infused with a carefully selected blend of valuable spices, cinnamon, ginger, cardamom, long pepper, and a touch of honey, slowly steeped to create a complex, aromatic concoction known as hippocras. This spiced wine was typically served at the very end of a grand meal, often as a digestive, believed to aid digestion, and was considered a luxurious and highly prized treat. Its expensive spices further signaled the host's immense wealth and sophisticated taste, making it a drink of conspicuous consumption. The quality of wine also varied immensely, from the simplest, locally produced vintage, perhaps consumed by laborers during harvest, to the highly prized imports from renowned vineyards in distant lands. Wine served as a potent symbol of status and refinement. The discussion of wines, their specific origins, e.g., from Gascony, Burgundy, the Rhine region, or Cyprus for sweet wines, their characteristics, and their suitability for different occasions, would have been a common topic of gentle, appreciative conversation at noble tables, a quiet display of connoisseurship. The very color of wine could also be important, with red wines often preferred, believed to be more warming. Beyond ale and wine, other regional drinks played their part, reflecting the local agricultural bounty and cultural traditions. Cider, made from fermented apples, was common in areas with abundant apple orchards, particularly in parts of northern France, like Normandy and Brittany, and throughout England. It offered a refreshing, slightly tart alternative to ale, and its production was similarly a seasonal and often domestic affair, requiring careful pressing and fermentation of apples. The gentle fizz and crisp taste of cider would have been a welcome respite, especially in warmer months. Mead, a beverage made from fermented honey and water, often with the addition of spices or fruits, was one of the oldest alcoholic drinks in Europe, its origins stretching back to prehistoric times. Its consumption was often linked to more ancient, pre-Christian traditions, and it remained popular in certain regions, especially among Germanic and Slavic peoples, and in areas where honey was plentiful. The gentle sweetness and warming quality of mead, combined with its historical resonance, would have offered a comforting and unique flavor profile, often consumed at celebrations or specific feasts. In areas like Scandinavia, mead held a particularly strong cultural significance, appearing in sagas and myths. Other less common drinks included posset, a warm drink of milk curdled with oil or wine, often spiced, a byproduct of cheese making, and simple fruit juices or infusions, though these were less stable and less widely consumed. The act of drinking in medieval society was deeply communal and often imbued with significant social and symbolic meaning. Imagine large wooden tankards, often passed between several individuals at a shared table, or shared goblets, symbolizing the bonds of camaraderie and trust among diners. The precise etiquette around sharing depended on social context and rank. In a peasant home, a single large jug might serve the entire family, with each person taking a turn. In a monastic refectory, cups might be filled and refilled by a server from a central pitcher. In a noble hall, while cups might be offered individually, the act of a lord raising a goblet to his guests or sharing a particularly fine vintage was a powerful gesture of hospitality and shared status. The pouring of wine from a decanter, the gentle clinking of earthenware cups or elaborate metal goblets, pewter silver, or even gold for the highest nobility. The subtle murmurs of conversation accompanying the flow of liquid, these were the quiet rituals that cemented social connections and underscored the importance of commensality. Drinking was not merely about quenching thirst. It was a social lubricant, a means of celebration, a way to mark agreements, and often a method to foster loyalty and forge alliances. The role of the butler or cup bearer in a noble household was a position of immense trust and importance, as they were responsible for the cellar, the service of beverages, and ensuring the quality and safety, even guarding against poisoning. A constant aristocratic fear of the drinks served to the lord and his esteemed guests. Their careful, almost ceremonial movements as they filled cups would have been a silent, reassuring presence, a bullet of service. The logistics of providing and preserving these beverages also speak to the ingenuity and challenges of the age. Ale, due to its relatively perishable nature, especially before the widespread use of hops, was often consumed quickly after brewing. Within days or a week, it was typically stored in large wooden barrels, often kept in cool cellars or dedicated brew houses, away from direct sunlight. Wine, while more robust than ale, also faced preservation challenges. It was stored in large wooden casks or clay amphorae, and its quality could degrade over time due to exposure to air or fluctuations in temperature. Wine cellars in castles were important, cool, dark spaces. Transportation of these liquids across vast distances by ship or cart was a major undertaking, requiring sturdy vessels and careful handling to prevent breakage or spoilage. The development of robust barrels and the understanding of basic sealing techniques were crucial for trade. Medieval taverns and inns played a vital role as points of distribution and consumption, often brewing their own ale or sourcing local wines, offering travelers and locals a place to rest, socialize, and quench their thirst. The sounds of clinking tankards and convivial chatter would have been a common backdrop in these public houses. Even the sweeteners used in these drinks tell a subtle story of scarcity and luxury. While modern beverages rely heavily on granulated sugar, in the medieval period, honey was the primary sweetener for most of society, gathered from wild bees or kept in apiaries. Its availability often dictated the sweetness of drinks like mead and spiced wines. Sugar, when it began to arrive in Europe from the Middle East, often via Venecite, was an incredibly expensive luxury, treated more like a rare spice or a medicine than a common ingredient, and reserved almost exclusively for the very highest tables. Its presence in a drink or dish was a powerful demonstration of extreme wealth and sophistication, perhaps sprinkled delicately on a dish or dissolved into a very special hippocras. The subtle differences in sweetness levels across social classes would have been immediately noticeable. So, as we gently consider the medieval drinks, let us appreciate the quiet resourcefulness that shaped this aspect of daily life. From the foundational, nourishing ale of the peasant, a daily sustenance consumed from dawn till dusk, to the spiced, luxurious wines of the noble, a symbol of refinement and global connection. The beverages of the Middle Ages were a testament to local resources, brewing skill, religious adherence, and the enduring human desire for both sustenance and communal joy. Each sip, whether humble or grand, carried the subtle echoes of a world far removed from our own, yet connected by the simple, universal need for a refreshing drink and the complex layers of meaning it could hold. Having now gently hydrated ourselves with the liquids of the medieval past, our quiet journey will next explore the more intimate details of how people actually consumed their food. Let us quietly turn our attention to the fascinating evolution of table manners and utensils, and the subtle rules that governed medieval dining. Chapter Fevi, Table Manners and Utensils, having now gently hydrated ourselves with the liquids of the medieval past. Our quiet journey will next explore the more intimate details of how people actually consumed their food. Let us quietly turn our attention to the fascinating evolution of table manners and utensils, and the subtle rules that governed medieval dining. When we consider medieval table manners, a common and often immediate image that arises is one of crude behavior, of boorish individuals tearing at meat with their bare hands, oblivious to any sense of decorum or refinement. This vivid picture, often painted by popular culture, is another of those intriguing historical simplifications. While medieval dining etiquette was certainly distinct from our contemporary norms, and perhaps less outwardly rigid than later periods, it was far from an uncontrolled free for all. In truth, it was governed by its own complex set of unspoken rules, practical considerations, and evolving social graces, a fascinating blend of necessity and nascent refinement. The most striking absence, from our modern perspective, would undoubtedly be the widespread use of the fork. This unassuming utensil, so utterly fundamental to our eating habits today, enabling us to cleanly and delicately transport food to our mouths, had a remarkably long and somewhat controversial journey into Western European dining. It arrived slowly, gradually, often through cultural influences from the more refined Byzantine Empire and later from the Italian states, where it began to gain traction earlier than in the more conservative north. For centuries, the fork was viewed with a mixture of suspicion, curiosity, and sometimes even disdain by northern Europeans. It was occasionally dismissed as an unnecessary affectation, perhaps considered effeminate or a sign of excessive luxury. Imagine a medieval knight, accustomed to the tactile directness of a sharp knife and his own capable fingers, perhaps scoffing at the delicate prongs of this newfangled Italian invention. Accounts suggest it was even preached against by some clergy as an excessive delicacy, or an affront to God's design, as God had given man fingers to eat. As such, the primary utensils at the medieval table for most people, for most of the Middle Ages, were simply the knife and the spoon. Each diner, particularly men, would typically carry and use their own knife. This was a truly versatile personal tool, not merely for eating. It was used for cutting meat from communal joints, slicing bread, and for countless general utility tasks throughout the day. Knives varied in quality, from simple iron blades for peasants to exquisitely crafted, often decorated steel blades with bone or ivory handles for the nobility. Spoons, typically made of wood or horn for the common folk, and increasingly of pewter, brass, silver, or even gold for the wealthy, were essential for consuming the prevalent pottages, soups, and other soft, semi-liquid foods that formed a large part of the medieval diet. These were scooped rather than pricked. Therefore, much of the eating was indeed done with the hands. However, this did not imply a chaotic or uncouth lack of manners. Far from it. Specific customs governed how hands were used to maintain a degree of cleanliness and decorum. It was generally considered polite to use only 3 fingers, the thumb, forefinger, and middle finger, when handling food from a communal platter, making an effort to keep the ring finger and pinky relatively clean. This allowed for a degree of delicacy and prevented the entire hand from becoming excessively soiled. Imagine the gentle precision required to select a choice piece of meat or a morsel of stew from a shared dish with just these digits. The concept of dipping one's fingers directly into communal sauces or dishes was generally frowned upon, though not always entirely avoided, particularly in less formal settings. A subtle scoop with a piece of bread might be more acceptable. A ritual that might surprise us with its persistence and importance was the practice of hand-washing. Before and often after meals, particularly in noble households, it was common for basins of water, sometimes elaborately crafted, to be brought out. Servants would pour water over the hands of diners, often offering clean cloths for drying. For the nobility, this ritual could be quite elaborate, with perfumed water, often scented with rosewater or orange blossom, and fine linen towels, sometimes embroidered. This was not just about basic hygiene, though cleanliness was certainly valued as much as possible. It was a deeply ingrained social custom, almost a mini ceremony that acknowledged the sacred act of breaking bread together and cleansed one for social interaction. Imagine the gentle murmuring as a servant approaches, the quiet splashing of water into the basin, the soft brushing of linen against skin, a moment of pause and purification before or after the meal's engagement. This public act of ablution reinforced status and order. Napkins, too, were in use, though perhaps not always in the individual, folded square form we know today. In some grander households, a long strip of fine linen might be draped along the table for all diners to use communally for wiping hands and mouths. Alternatively, larger, sometimes embroidered, towels might be provided for nobles, demonstrating the lord's generosity and the meticulousness of his household. The type and quality of the napkin material would again clearly indicate the status of the host and his guests. These were practical necessities, catching drips and wiping away the residue of eating by hand. The seating arrangements at a medieval feast also spoke volumes about hierarchy and social order. The high table, positioned on a raised dais at one end of the hall, was reserved exclusively for the lord, his lady, their most important guests, and perhaps a high-ranking cleric. This elevation physically separated them from the rest of the diners, emphasizing their superior status. Below the dais, long trestled tables would be arranged for the rest of the household knights, squires, retainers, and more important servants seated according to their rank. The concept of the salt line was also highly symbolic. Guests of higher status would be seated above the salt, closer to the lord, while those of lesser rank would be below the salt, a subtle but potent visual cue of one's place in the pecking order. This rigid seating arrangement ensured that everyone knew their place and reinforced the social structure of the household. Behavior at the table, while less rigid than later periods, still had its nuances and its own codes of politeness. Certain actions, though considered crude or offensive today, were tolerated or even unremarkable in the medieval context. For instance, spitting was common, but etiquette manuals often advised doing so discreetly, perhaps into a corner or under the table rather than directly onto the floor or across the table. Blowing one's nose, too, was a normal bodily function, though ideally done away from the food or with a clean cloth. Belching was sometimes seen as a sign of satisfaction, though polite society might encourage moderation or a quiet apology. However, behaviors such as loud chewing, speaking with a full mouth, or reaching across the table directly in front of others were generally considered impolite. The popular 15th century English text, the Book of Courtesy, gently advises young men not to neither blow your nose on your napkin nor wipe your teeth with it, and to not pick your teeth with your knife. Even the famed philosopher Erasmus, in his 16th century work De Civilitate Morum Pueriliums, on the civility of children's manners, offers guidance that would strike us as incredibly basic today, such as not scratching oneself at the table, not cleaning one's teeth with a fingernail, or not spitting food back onto a platter, highlighting that these were indeed common practices needing gentle correction among those aspiring to refinement. The evolution of table manners was a slow, gradual process influenced by changing social structures, increased wealth, and the desire for greater refinement. Early medieval dining was characterized by its practicality and communal nature, born of necessity and survival. As society became more complex, and as notions of individual identity and personal space began to emerge, so too did the desire for more formalized etiquette. This shift was subtly driven by the rising standards of courts. the influence of chivalric ideals, and the spread of new customs through trade and travel. The medieval table, therefore, was a fascinating microcosm of broader societal changes, a space where nourishment, social hierarchy, and the subtle dance of human interaction gently intertwined, shaping a dining experience that was profoundly different, yet endlessly intriguing, a silent language of who you were and where you belonged. Chapter 6c. The Feast as Spectacle, Banquets and Entertainment. Having now gently examined the intricate world of medieval table manners and utensils, our quiet journey will now shift focus. Let us elevate our gaze from the individual plate to the grand stage itself, as we explore how medieval banquets transcended mere dining to become elaborate spectacles of power, wealth, and entertainment. These were not simply meals, they were meticulously choreographed theatrical performances designed to impress, persuade, and solidify social bonds, often with profound political and cultural implications. The primary purpose of medieval banquets extended far beyond simple sustenance. For a lord or king, a grand feast was an unparalleled opportunity for display, a tangible, undeniable demonstration of their immense wealth, their boundless generosity, and their formidable power. The sheer quantity and variety of food, the lavishness of the hall's decoration, the number of liveried servants, and the quality of the entertainment all served as a powerful visual and sensory proclamation of status. Beyond this overt display, banquets were crucial for political networking, diplomacy, and alliance building. Imagine a lord hosting visiting nobles. The feast was a setting for subtle negotiations, for strengthening fragile alliances, for impressing potential allies, and for subtly intimidating rivals. Important treaties might be discussed over spiced wine, and oaths of loyalty reinforced over shared meat. They also served as grand celebrations for significant life events or religious holidays, such as weddings, coronations, knighting ceremonies, royal birthdays, or major religious festivals like Christmas or Easter. These were moments for collective rejoicing and communal identity reinforcement. The setting for these grand occasions was almost invariably the great hall of a castle palace or a major monastic institution. Imagine this vast space, a soaring timbered ceiling, perhaps adorned with banners and tapestries depicting chivalric scenes or heraldic devices, designed to impress and to regulate sound. The lighting would be soft, flickering, and warm, cast by dozens, if not hundreds, of candles, oil lamps, and roaring central fires, creating an atmospheric glow that danced across the faces of the diners. At one end of the hall, elevated on a raised dais, stood the high table reserved exclusively for the lord, his lady, their most esteemed guests. Else perhaps royalty, powerful bishops, or foreign dignitaries, and the most high-ranking members of their household. This physical elevation served to visually emphasize their superior status and authority, clearly separating them from the general populace of the hall. Below the dais, long trestle tables would be arranged for the rest of the household, knights, squires, yeomen, more important retainers, and household servants, seated according to their precise rank and function. The very seating arrangement was a silent, meticulous language of hierarchy, ensuring that everyone knew their exact place within the social order of the household. The acoustics of such halls, often echoing and grand, would have carried the sounds of conversation, music, and laughter, contributing to the vibrant atmosphere. The procession of dishes during a banquet was an event in itself, a carefully choreographed sequence designed to build anticipation and impress. Each course would be brought in with a degree of ceremony, often accompanied by the sound of music, trumpets, or drums. Imagine the sight of liveried servants moving in a precise order, carrying immense platters laden with food from the distant kitchens to the high table, then distributing them down the other tables. The dishes might be presented with elaborate flair, perhaps carried by servants riding hobby horses, or presented on large, decorated chargers. This element of parade transformed the act of serving food into a dramatic spectacle, adding to the grandeur of the occasion. The sheer quantity of food, presented in multiple removes or courses, was also a deliberate display of abundance, a stark contrast to the daily scarcity faced by many outside the castle walls. Central to the theatricality of the medieval banquet was the concept of culinary artistry and elaborate food presentation. This went far beyond simply cooking and serving. Cooks were expected to be artists, capable of transforming ingredients into astonishing visual delights. The most iconic examples of this were the subtleties. These were intricate, non-edible, or only partially edible, sculpted food items, typically crafted from sugar paste, marzipan, pastry, or even wax, often adorned with painted details. Their themes were remarkably diverse. They could represent mythological creatures, dragons, unicorns, heraldic beasts as lions, eagles, historical events, or even political allegories designed to subtly praise the host or gently mock rivals. Imagine a magnificent sugar castle, complete with miniature battlements and flags, or a marzipan knight on horseback, perfectly rendered. These subtleties were rarely meant to be eaten whole. They were primarily visual conversation starters, grand artistic displays placed prominently on the table, meant to be admired, discussed, and to showcase the immense skill and creativity of the kitchen staff. They were also subtle tools of propaganda, conveying messages through their intricate symbolism. Beyond the subtlety, medieval cooks also excelled at disguised dishes, transforming common foods to appear as something entirely different and more spectacular. A classic example was the roasted swan or peacock, which, after cooking, would be meticulously or dressed in its own meticulously cleaned and re-attached feathers, often with gilded feet and beak, and presented as if it were still alive and strutting. This created a startling and impressive visual illusion. Similarly, fish might be artfully molded and painted to resemble small animals, or humble vegetables might be arranged to mimic complex structures. The use of bright colors was also paramount to this artistry. Cooks employed natural dyes derived from saffron gayels for brilliant gold yellow, madacé for reds, woad for blues, and various plant extracts to create intensely vibrant, sometimes almost unnatural, colors in their dishes, turning a simple sauce or a piece of poultry into a kaleidoscope of hues. This visual extravagance was a deliberate sensory assault, intended to dazzle and impress guests, particularly those unfamiliar with such displays. The banqueting hall was not merely a dining room. It was a performance space, and entertainment was an indispensable part of the experience. Musicians, often positioned in a gallery above the main hall, would play a range of instruments including lutes, harps, pipes, shawms, and percussion, providing a constant sonic backdrop from gentle background melodies to triumphant fanfares announcing new courses. Jongleurs, itinerant entertainers who could juggle, perform acrobatics, sing, tell stories, and play instruments. Acrobats, Mamassas masked performers enacting short plays or dances. And jesters, Paul, whose wit and antics provided comic relief, would circulate among the tables, engaging with guests and offering a varied program of diversions. Poets might recite verses praising the Lord or epic tales, while storytellers captivated the audience with narratives of chivalry or adventure. This constant stream of entertainment ensured that guests were not only well fed but also continuously engaged and amused, reinforcing the Lord's generosity and his ability to provide boundless delight. The sounds of laughter, applause, and the gentle strains of music would have filled the air, blending with the clatter of dishes and the murmuring of conversation. The organization and execution of such a complex event required a highly skilled and extensive household staff. The feast masters or stewards were central figures overseeing every aspect of the banquet, from the procurement of ingredients and the coordination of the kitchen staff to the seating arrangements and the flow of entertainment. Their meticulous planning ensured a seamless, impressive spectacle. Every detail, from the placement of a salt cellar to the timing of a musical interlude, was carefully considered to contribute to the overall impression of grandeur and order. Beyond the immediate sensory delights, food at medieval banquets often carried profound symbolism. Dishes might be allegorical, representing political messages, religious narratives, or moral lessons. For example, a dish shaped like a lamb might symbolize purity or sacrifice, while a dish with multiple layers could represent the hierarchical structure of society. The very act of sharing a meal, particularly with specific individuals, was a powerful non-verbal communication solidifying social bonds and political alliances. The food itself became a language conveying meaning beyond mere taste or texture. The combined effect of the opulent setting, the ceremonial service, the culinary artistry, and the continuous entertainment was a complete sensory immersion. The visual spectacle of the dishes, the aromatic blend of roasted meats and exotic spices, the diverse sounds of music, conversation, and performance, and the rich textures of the food all contributed to an unforgettable experience. These banquets were not just about filling bellies, they were about filling the senses, shaping perceptions, and reinforcing the social and political order in a tangible, deeply impressive way. They were moments where the ordinary act of eating was elevated to an extraordinary art form, a public display of power and prestige that echoed through the medieval world. Having now witnessed the magnificent spectacle of medieval banquets and the artistry of their creation, our quiet journey will next lead us behind the scenes. Let us gently slip into the bustling, hot, and often chaotic realm of the medieval kitchen to understand the immense labor and hidden skills that brought these culinary wonders to life. Chapter 7: The Medieval Kitchen, a realm of heat and skill. Having now witnessed the magnificent spectacle of medieval banquets and the artistry of their creation, our quiet journey will next lead us behind the scenes. Let us gently slip into the bustling, hot, and often chaotic realm of the medieval kitchen to understand the immense labor and hidden skills that brought these culinary wonders to life. Forget for a moment the romanticized image of a lone, cheerful cook stirring a pot over a quaint fire. The reality of a medieval kitchen, particularly in a large noble household or a monastery, was a complex, arduous, and highly organized operation. A true realm of sensory intensity. It was a space dominated by overwhelming heat, the constant crackle and roar of open flames, the pervasive aroma of smoke, roasting meats, and simmering stews, and the ceaseless activity of dozens of dedicated, often sweat-stained staff. The conditions were challenging, the demands relentless, and the skills required were often far more intricate than we might imagine. The layout of a medieval kitchen was determined primarily by practicality and safety, given the enormous fire risk posed by multiple open hearths and ovens. The kitchen was almost invariably located in a separate building or a distinct wing, often connected to the main hall by a covered passage or a long outdoor walkway. This separation was a crucial precaution against devastating fires that could engulf an entire castle. Within this detached structure, the kitchen itself was not a single room, but a series of specialized areas, each dedicated to a specific part of the culinary process. Imagine stepping from the cool outside air into the oppressive warmth of the main cooking area, a vast, high, ceilinged space designed to vent smoke through louvers or rudimentary chimneys. Nearby would be the larder, a cool, dark room for storing cured meats and fish, the pantry for bread, cheese, and dry goods, the scullery for washing dishes and preparing vegetables, and the buttery for storing ale and wine barrels. Some larger establishments even had a dedicated bakehouse with its own immense ovens, separate from the main cooking hearths, and a brewery for brewing all on a vast scale. Each of these specialized zones hummed with its own quiet, focused activity. The equipment of a medieval kitchen was remarkably simple by modern standards, yet highly effective in the hands of skilled practitioners. The central feature was almost always one or more enormous open hearths built directly into the floor or a large stone wall. Over these roaring fires, heavy iron cauldrons would hang from chains, constantly simmering with pottages, stews, or water for boiling. Meats were roasted on long spits turned manually by a spitboy, the low-ranking servant, often a child, enduring intense heat and smoke, or, in later periods, by rudimentary clockwork mechanisms, or even by small dogs running in a wheel connected to the spit, hence, turn-spit dogs. Imagine the constant, rhythmic turning, ensuring even cooking and a perfectly browned exterior. Large, flat griddles were used for cooking flatbreads or pancakes. Other essential tools included a variety of knives for chopping, mincing, and butchering, wooden stirring spoons and ladles, sieves for sifting flour or straining broths, and large wooden bowls and platters for preparation and serving. The absence of modern conveniences like refrigeration meant that every piece of equipment, from the well-seasoned wooden cutting boards to the sturdy earthenware pots, was designed for practicality and durability in an environment demanding constant activity and careful handling of perishable ingredients. The sheer weight of many of these tools, from enormous iron skillets to heavy cleavers, speaks to the physical demands of the work. The staff of a medieval kitchen was extensive and rigidly hierarchical, a small army dedicated to feeding the household. At the apex was the master cook, a highly respected professional, often a person of considerable skill and authority. Responsible for the entire operation, they oversaw the menu, managed supplies, directed the staff, and executed the most complex and prestigious dishes. Beneath the master cook was a precise hierarchy, apprentices learning the trade. Starting with the most basic tasks, saucers specializing in the preparation of the complex, often spiced. Sauces that were a hallmark of noble cuisine, lardingers, expert in preparing and larding meats, spit boys, as mentioned. Enduring the heat to turn spits, scullery maids, perpetually engaged in washing countless dishes and scrubbing pots in cold water. Pantrymen, managing dry goods, butlers and brewers, overseeing drinks, and various other specialized roles like bread bakers and confectioners. Imagine the constant movement, the unspoken communication, the precise coordination required among dozens of individuals, all working in close proximity, each performing their specific task to ensure the smooth flow of food from raw ingredient to finished dish. The long hours were relentless, often from dawn until late into the night, particularly during banquets or periods of high demand. Fire management was perhaps the most crucial and demanding skill in the medieval kitchen. With multiple open hearths and sometimes additional ovens, controlling heat was a constant, intricate ballet. Cooks needed to understand how to build and maintain fires for different purposes, a roaring blaze for roasting, a steady, smoldering heat for slow simmering, or glowing embers for gentle warming. The air in the kitchen would be thick with smoke, despite attempts at ventilation through louvers or rudimentary chimneys. Imagine the constant sting in the eyes, the pervasive smell of wood smoke clinging to everything. This was not a precise science, it was an art, learned through years of direct, physical experience. Cooks would gauge temperatures by hand, by eye, by the color of the flames, and by the sounds of the food cooking. The constant battle with the heat and smoke, combined with the physical exertion of lifting heavy pots and turning spits, made kitchen work exceptionally arduous and often dangerous, with burns and cuts being common occupational hazards. Sourcing ingredients was another daily challenge that required careful management. Large households could not simply order supplies from a market. Daily deliveries would arrive from the Lord's own farms and manors, bringing fresh produce, dairy, and eggs, but specialized ingredients, particularly precious spices, fine wines, and certain types of fish, had to be procured from distant markets or specialized purveyors. The clerk of the kitchen or the steward held a crucial role in procurement, meticulously managing supplies, keeping detailed accounts of expenditures, and ensuring a continuous flow of high-quality ingredients, often negotiating prices and overseeing deliveries. Imagine the constant stream of merchants and farmers arriving at the castle gates, their wagons laden with goods, being carefully inspected before their provisions were allowed into the kitchen complex. This intricate logistical dance underscores the complexity of feeding a large medieval household, a process that began long before the food ever reached the kitchen hearth. The challenges faced by a medieval kitchen staff were immense and pervasive. The most significant was the constant battle against spoilage and hygiene. Without refrigeration, highly perishable foods like fresh meat, fish, and dairy had to be consumed quickly or preserved immediately. This led to ingenious, though labor-intensive, preservation methods like salting, smoking, drying, and pickling, which filled larders with pungent, cured provisions. Pest control was another continuous struggle, with mice, rats, and insects attracted to food stores. Cooks operated with limited tools, manual labor being the primary power source for everything from grinding grain to turning spits. Despite best efforts, the lack of modern sanitation meant a higher risk of foodborne illnesses, though medieval people had their own methods of managing this, such as thorough cooking and the heavy use of spices believed to have antiseptic properties. The sheer volume of food required daily, coupled with the constant demand for freshness and variety, meant that the kitchen was a realm of ceaseless, high-pressure activity. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, medieval cooks developed a remarkable body of knowledge and skill. Meticulously recorded in cookbooks, though these were rare and highly valued documents. Unlike modern recipe books that provide precise measurements, medieval cookbooks often offered vague instructions: a handful, to taste, cook until done, implying that the cook was already a highly experienced artisan, learning primarily through apprenticeship and practical experience rather than by strictly following written directions. These rare texts, such as Leviandia or the form of curry, reveal a fascinating complexity in medieval cuisine, detailing intricate sauces, multi-stage preparations, and sophisticated flavor combinations. A testament to the master cook's deep understanding of ingredients and techniques. They guide us through a world of culinary practices that were precise, often surprising, and deeply rooted in generations of accumulated skill. The very atmosphere of the medieval kitchen was a sensory overload, a constant hum of activity. Imagine the intense heat radiating from the massive stone hearths, the air shimmering with the heat waves. The pervasive smells would be a complex tapestry, the sharp tang of wood smoke, the rich aroma of roasting fats dripping onto coals, the savory steam rising from bubbling cauldrons, the pungent notes of curing meats in the larder, and the delicate perfume of exotic spices being ground and mixed. Mingling with these would be the more earthy scents of fresh vegetables and raw ingredients. The sounds would be equally evocative. The rhythmic chopping of vegetables on wooden blocks, the sizzle of fat in pans, the gentle bubbling of stews, the scrape of ladles against pots, the occasional clang of metal, and the constant murmur of voices, punctuated by terse commands from the master cook. It was a realm where every sense was engaged, a testament to the immense labor and hidden skills that transformed raw materials into the celebrated feasts of the medieval world. Having now gently slipped into the bustling, hot, and skillful realm of the medieval kitchen, our quiet journey will next lead us out beyond the castle walls and domestic hearths. Let us quietly consider how medieval people experienced eating out, exploring the vibrant array of taverns, inns, and markets that shaped the public culinary landscape. Chapter 80: Eating Out Taverns, Inns, and Markets. Having now gently slipped into the bustling, hot, and skillful realm of the medieval kitchen, our quiet journey will next lead us out beyond the castle walls and domestic hearths. let us quietly consider how medieval people experienced eating out, exploring the vibrant array of taverns, inns, and markets that shaped the public culinary landscape. For many medieval people, particularly the vast majority who did not live within the confines of a noble household or monastery, dining was typically a private affair, occurring within the simple confines of their own homes. However, the medieval world, especially in towns and cities, offered a surprisingly diverse array of options for eating out, places where people could purchase prepared food, enjoy a drink, socialize, and engage with the wider community. These establishments were not simply places of commerce, they were vital social hubs, points of convergence where different segments of society often mingled, shared news, and found respite from the daily grind. Let us first consider the ubiquitous taverns and alehouses. These were the most common public eating and drinking establishments, found in virtually every village, town, and city across Europe. Imagine a dimly lit, often smoky room, filled with the murmur of conversation, the clinking of earthenware mugs, and the earthy aroma of stale ale and simple food. For the working class, these were not merely places to drink, they served as essential social centers. Here, laborers, artisans, and farmers could gather after a long day, exchange gossip, discuss local affairs, negotiate deals, and find simple, hearty nourishment. The food offered was typically basic, designed to be affordable and filling large hunks of bread, often the coarser, cheaper varieties, wedges of firm cheese, and perhaps a bowl of thick, simmering stew or pottage made with whatever ingredients were readily available, root vegetables, pulses, and perhaps a small amount of tough, slow-cooked meat. And, of course, there was the ever-present ale, brewed on premises or sourced locally, consumed in copious quantities as both refreshment and a relatively safe liquid, as we discussed earlier. The atmosphere in these establishments could range from quietly convivial to raucously boisterous, depending on the time of day and the clientele. They were places of communal warmth, a refuge from the cold or the loneliness of solitary life. Their simple comforts deeply valued. Moving beyond the local alehouse, inns provided more comprehensive services, specifically catering to travelers. These establishments were typically larger and more substantial, found along major roads, trade routes, and within cities. Imagine a weary traveler, perhaps a merchant or a pilgrim, arriving at an inn after a long day's journey. The inn would offer not only lodging, often communal sleeping arrangements, where strangers might share a bed in a large dormitory-style room, but also basic, warm meals. The food at inns was generally more varied than in a simple tavern, though still practical and designed for the hungry traveler. You might find roasted meats, fish on fast days, bread, cheese, and, of course, plenty of ale or wine. The main dining area, often a communal hall, would be a place where travelers from different regions and social strata might briefly intersect, sharing a meal and perhaps exchanging news or stories from distant lands. The stable yard would be bustling with horses, wagons, and the sounds of stable hands, while the common room provided warmth and light. While offering a necessary service, inns could also be places of potential danger, with highwaymen, opportunists, and petty criminals sometimes frequenting them, making a traveler's vigilance a quiet, constant companion. The smells would be a mixture of cooking food, stale ale, wood smoke, and the earthy scent of horses and straw from the stables. Markets were perhaps the most vibrant and diverse places to find food outside the home. Every town, and many villages, would host regular market days, transforming open squares into bustling hubs of commerce and sensory delight. Imagine the vibrant scene. Colorful stalls laden with fresh produce that are seasonal vegetables, fruits like apples and pears, different cuts of meat secazo from local slaughterhouses, various types of fish seca, both fresh and preserved, mounds of freshly baked bread, and dairy products like cheese and butter. But beyond raw ingredients, markets were also places to find ready-to-eat foods from street vendors. You might find hot pies, perhaps filled with seasoned meat or a vegetable mixture designed to be eaten on the go. Imagine the enticing aroma of freshly cooked sausages sizzling over a small brazier, or the sweet smell of hot pastries tempting passers-by. These vendors catered to laborers, shoppers, and anyone who needed a quick, affordable meal without the means or time for home cooking. The market was a sensory overload, the cacophony of vendors shouting their wares, the mingled smells of fresh produce, cooking food, livestock, and unwashed crowds, and the constant press of people moving through the stalls. It was a place where food was not just sustenance, but an experience, a daily spectacle of supply and demand. Beyond these common establishments, specialized food vendors catered to specific needs. Bakehouses and cookshops, paste shops, were particularly prevalent in cities. These establishments did not offer seating, but specialized in selling prepared food to take away. Bakehouses provided freshly baked bread throughout the day, ensuring a steady supply for those who didn't bake at home. Cookshops, on the other hand, offered a variety of cooked meats, often roasted or boiled, as well as pies, pasties, and other hot dishes. These were vital for single laborers, apprentices, or anyone without cooking facilities in their lodging, offering a convenient and relatively affordable alternative to preparing meals at home. They were also particularly busy on fast days, when they would offer a wide selection of fish pies and other Lenten-approved dishes, showcasing their adaptability to religious dietary laws. Imagine the steam rising from a hot meat pie, its savory aroma drawing you in from the street. Religious institutions also played a significant role in providing food for those outside their immediate communities. Pilgrim hostels were established along major pilgrimage routes, offering basic, often communal, lodging and meals for travelers journeying to holy sites. Monasteries, as acts of charity and piety, frequently provided food for the poor, often distributing the broken meats or leftovers from the monastic refectory, or preparing simple, nourishing meals for distribution at their gates. This was a crucial social safety net in a world without formalized welfare systems, an act of quiet compassion and spiritual duty. Furthermore, large-scale fairs were major events that brought together merchants and people from vast distances, and they also served as incredible culinary hubs. These infrequent but grand gatherings offered an even more diverse array of foods, often including exotic or specialty items not usually available in local markets. Imagine tents and stalls offering spiced nuts, dried fruits, foreign cheeses, or perhaps special pastries brought from distant towns. Fairs were moments of culinary adventure, where one might encounter tastes and ingredients rarely experienced in daily life, adding another layer to the medieval eating out experience. The sheer scale and temporary nature of these events made them a unique part of the medieval culinary landscape, a vibrant, temporary city of goods and flavors. In essence, medieval people engaged with a surprisingly varied public culinary landscape, from the familiar, comforting hum of the local alehouse to the bustling sensory explosion of the market square, and the quiet respite of an inn. These places offered more than just sustenance. They were vibrant social hubs, economic exchange points, and vital components of community life, reflecting the diverse needs and opportunities of the medieval world. Each establishment had its own character, its own smells, sounds, and rhythms, all contributing to the rich tapestry of medieval dining. Having now gently wandered through the public spaces where medieval people ate and drank, our quiet journey will next lead us into a more subtle and theoretical realm. Let us quietly turn our attention to the fascinating beliefs surrounding food as medicine, and how medieval dietary theories profoundly influenced what people chose to eat for their health and well-being. Chapter 19: Food as Medicine. Medieval dietary beliefs. Having now gently wandered through the public spaces where medieval people ate and drank, our quiet journey will next lead us into a more subtle and theoretical realm. Let us quietly turn our attention to the fascinating beliefs surrounding food as medicine, and how medieval dietary theories profoundly influenced what people chose to eat for their health and well-being. In the medieval mind, the line between food and medicine was often beautifully blurred, almost imperceptible. What one consumed was believed to have a direct, profound impact on one's bodily health, temperament, and even one's very disposition. This intricate understanding was deeply rooted in the ancient humoral theory, a medical concept inherited from Greek and Roman physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, and meticulously refined and adopted throughout the medieval period. This theory posited that the human body was composed of 4 fundamental fluids, or humus: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, choler, and black bile melancholy. Each humor was associated with specific qualities, hot or cold, wet or dry, and linked to particular elements, seasons, and temperaments. The key to health, medieval practitioners believed, was maintaining a perfect balance among these 4 humors within the body. Imbalance was believed to be the root cause of illness, and food, more than any other intervention, was considered the primary tool for restoring this delicate equilibrium. Imagine a medieval physician, perhaps a learned cleric or a university-trained doctor, carefully observing a patient. Their diagnosis would not merely focus on symptoms, but on identifying which humor was in excess or deficient. A patient suffering from a fever, for instance, might be seen as having too much hot blood or yellow bile. Conversely, someone feeling lethargic and melancholy might be deemed to have an excess of cold, phlegm, or black bile. The prescription, then, would often be highly personalized and fundamentally dietary. Food was meticulously categorized by its perceived humoral qualities. For example, ginger was considered hot and dry, good for warming the stomach and expelling excess phlegm. Lettuce, on the other hand, was cold and wet, believed to cool the body and soothe inflammation. Imagine the careful consideration given to each ingredient, not just for its taste, but for its inherent medicinal properties. A quiet, constant calculation occurring in kitchens and medical consultations. Medieval doctors, therefore, functioned as much as dietitians as they did physicians in the modern sense. Their medical advice would frequently involve elaborate dietary regimens, customized to the patient's constitution, their ailment, the season, and even their age. A person of a sanguine temperament, sussy associated with blood, hot and wet, might be advised to eat cooling and drying foods. Someone suffering from a choleric imbalance, yellow bile, hot and dry, might be given cooling and moistening foods. This prescriptive approach permeated medical texts and popular understanding. Cookbooks, rather than simply listing recipes, often included chapters or appendices dedicated to dietary advice, outlining which foods were beneficial for which conditions, and how to combine them for optimal health. For instance, consuming a hot, heavy meat dish might be balanced with a cold, moist salad or a refreshing fruit to maintain humoral equilibrium. Beyond their general humoral qualities, specific foods were attributed with precise medicinal properties. Garlic, for example, was seen as hot and dry, good for treating colds, fevers, and as a general antiseptic. Onions were believed to cleanse the system. Honey, as we've seen in other contexts, was valued not just as a sweetener, but for its perceived warming and antiseptic qualities, often used in medicinal concoctions for wounds or respiratory ailments. Wine, in moderation, was often considered beneficial, believed to aid digestion and warm the humors, particularly red wine. Even humble pottages and gruels were categorized by their ease of digestion and their ability to nourish without unduly upsetting the body's delicate balance. A very light, easily digestible chicken broth might be prescribed for a weak patient, while a rich, spiced meat broth could be given to someone needing to regain strength. The concept of digestion theory also played a fascinating role. Medieval physicians believed that food was cooked in the stomach, much like in a cauldron, and then transformed into humors. For this process to occur efficiently, food needed to be consumed in a specific order, often from light to heavy, or from easily digestible to more complex. It was believed that the heaviest foods should be eaten last, as they would cook longest. This led to specific recommendations for the sequence of courses in a meal, particularly at noble tables. Imagine a meal starting with light fruits or simple broths, gradually progressing to rich meats and complex pies, and perhaps concluding with sweet, spiced digestives. This intentional ordering was not just about pleasing the palate. It was a careful, quiet orchestration designed to optimize the body's internal workings and prevent indigestion, a common complaint. Fasting, as we discussed in relation to the church, also had a significant medical dimension beyond its purely religious purpose. Abstaining from certain foods, particularly rich meats and heavy dairy, was believed to cleanse the body, purge excess humors, and restore balance. It was seen as a way to rest the digestive system and allow the body to heal. Thus, while Lenten fasts were primarily spiritual, they were also widely accepted as periods of physical purification and health benefits. Patients recovering from illness might be put on strict, temporary fasts to aid their recovery, demonstrating a quiet understanding of the body's need for respite. This intertwined belief system meant that dietary choices, whether prescribed by the church or a physician, were often seen as beneficial for both the soul and the body. The preparation of food within the medieval kitchen would often reflect these humoral theories. Cooks were not simply following recipes. They were often subtly adjusting ingredients and cooking methods to align with current medical wisdom or the specific needs of the household members. A master cook might consult with the household physician to determine the appropriate diet for the lord based on his temperament or a passing ailment. Certain foods might be tempered by cooking them in ways that altered their humoral qualities. Hot meat might be boiled to make it less dry, or a cold vegetable spiced to make it warming. This constant, subtle interplay between kitchen and medical theory meant that food was never truly inert. It was a living, dynamic force, capable of healing or harming, depending on its preparation and consumption. Even the presentation of food could carry humoral significance. Bright, warm colors, achieved with saffron or other dyes, might be associated with warming qualities, while cooler, paler dishes could be seen as more cooling. The sensory experience of eating was not just about taste, but about the perceived effect on the internal balance. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of consuming a perfectly balanced meal, knowing that it was not only delicious, but also gently contributing to your overall well-being. The medieval understanding of food as medicine, while lacking our modern scientific basis, reveals a profound respect for the body and a holistic approach to health. It emphasizes a world where every bite had meaning, where daily dietary choices were imbued with a quiet, continuous significance for physical and mental well-being. It was a fascinating blend of inherited ancient wisdom, practical observation, and spiritual belief, all contributing to a unique and intricate dietary philosophy. Having now quietly explored the subtle connections between food and medieval medical beliefs, our comprehensive journey through medieval feasting approaches its gentle conclusion. Let us, in our final chapter, bring together all these threads to consider the profound and often surprising culinary legacy of the Middle Ages, and how these ancient practices and lingering myths continue to quietly echo in our own time. Chapter 10, A Culinary Legacy and Our Lingering Myths. Having now quietly explored the subtle connections between food and medieval medical beliefs, our comprehensive journey through medieval feasting approaches its gentle conclusion. Let us, in our final chapter, bring together all these threads to consider the profound and often surprising culinary legacy of the Middle Ages, and how these ancient practices and lingering myths continue to quietly echo in our own time. As the flickering light of the medieval hearth gently fades from our imagined great hall, we can now clearly discern that the reality of medieval feasting was far removed from the boisterous, often inaccurate, and overly simplified portrayals that commonly reside in our popular imagination. We have quietly, meticulously, peeled back layers of misconception, revealing a dining landscape that was, above all, pragmatic, deeply intertwined with the immediate needs of survival, the pervasive influence of religious doctrine, and the subtle, yet powerful, markers of social status. Let us gently recap the key insights from our journey. We began with bread's centrality, understanding that it was the foundational foodstuff, a dietary constant that transcended social divides, appearing in robust, dark forms for the common folk and refined white loaves for the elite. This humble loaf, in its production and consumption, quietly dictated the very rhythm of daily life and reflected the economic and social structures of the time. We then eased into the realm of spices and herbs, debunking the myth that medieval food was bland or that spices primarily masked spoilage. Instead, we found a vibrant, aromatic world where exotic spices were precious symbols of wealth and culinary artistry, while local herbs provided essential, grounding flavors. This highlighted a sophisticated, if different, medieval palate that valued complex combinations and vibrant colors. Our exploration then moved to the duality of meat and fish, revealing that meat was a costly luxury, especially for the peasantry, whose protein often came from pulses and eggs. We understood the profound impact of the Church's influence with its pervasive system of fast days, Fridays, Saturdays, Wednesdays, Lent, Ember days, vigils, meaning that fish prepared with astonishing ingenuity often took center stage at medieval tables for significant portions of the year. Following this, we explored the fascinating flow of medieval drinks, gently setting aside the notion that alcohol was consumed solely due to unsafe water. Instead, we saw how ale served as a nourishing, safer daily staple for the masses, while wine was a status symbol for the wealthy, and how communal drinking fostered social bonds. We then turned our attention to table manners and utensils, discovering that medieval dining was governed by its own precise, though distinct, etiquette. The absence of forks for much of the period meant a reliance on knives and spoons, and the practical, three-fingered use of hands, alongside important rituals like communal hand-washing. Finally, we elevated our view to the feast as spectacle, understanding that banquets were elaborate theatrical performances designed for political display, social bonding, and entertainment, featuring edible sculptures, subtleties, and disguised dishes. And just behind this grandeur, we peeked into the medieval kitchen, a realm of intense heat, tireless labor, and immense skill, where dedicated staff transformed raw ingredients into culinary wonders using simple but effective tools. We concluded by connecting food to medieval dietary beliefs, revealing the deep link between what one ate and one's health, guided by the intricate humoral theory where food was indeed medicine. So, what then is the enduring legacy of medieval dining? And why do these lingering myths persist? The medieval period, in its approach to food, offers us profound lessons in resilience and resourcefulness. Faced with technological limitations, the unpredictability of nature, and constant demand, medieval people devised ingenious methods for cultivation, preservation, and preparation. Their practices, though often labor-intensive, were remarkably sustainable, embodying a nose to tail and root to leaf philosophy born of necessity, where nothing was wasted. This deep, practical respect for every morsel of food stands in stark contrast to much of modern food culture. The myths, such as the universally bland diet, the unhygienic manners, or the constant drunken revelry, likely persist because they simplify a complex past, often serving to highlight a perceived progress. In our own era, it's easier to envision a monolithic, crude past than to grapple with its nuanced realities. Yet, the truth is far more fascinating. Medieval people understood flavor, sought variety within their means, practiced specific forms of hygiene, and observed complex social rituals around eating. Their feasts were not just for consumption, but for connection, display, and communication. Subtle echoes of medieval practices can still be found in our own kitchens and dining habits. The enduring appeal of hearty stews and robust, artisan breads, the comforting richness of a well-crafted pie, and the subtle allure of spiced beverages all have roots in this distant past. The very concept of slow cooking, allowing flavors to deepen over time, is a direct inheritance from medieval techniques honed over open fires. Even our modern concept of comfort food, something warm, nourishing, and familiar, carries a resonance with the sustaining pottages and owls that anchored daily medieval life. Ultimately, medieval dining teaches us about the profound connection between food, society, and the human spirit. It reminds us that eating is never just about physical hunger. It is about community, identity, hierarchy, celebration, and even one's place in the cosmos. It reveals a world where every bite had meaning, where sustenance was intricately woven with spiritual belief, economic reality, and social aspiration. The quiet, daily struggle to feed oneself and one's family, balanced with moments of extravagant communal joy, paints a deeply human picture of a distant age. As the last echoes of our culinary journey through the Middle Ages gently fade, allow the images of flickering hearths, the aroma of ancient spices, and the quiet murmur of medieval meals to settle softly in your mind. Feel the quiet calm deepen around you. The complexities of the past gently dissolve into the quiet simplicity of the present moment. Your pillow is soft, your breathing steady, slowing with each passing moment, easing you deeper into rest. Let yourself relax, fully and completely. Allow the gentle hum of our shared history to lull you into a peaceful slumber.